Most people think they know themselves. They don't. They know their habits. They know their defenses. They know the version of themselves that showed up every time someone pushed them. That's not self-awareness. That's damage with the personality. I'm Arthur. This is Cuffed. 2 musings. 20 minutes. Let's get into it. This is an exciting podcast. I think this is episode 24, but more importantly, we are starting the architecture of self. So let's talk briefly about how we got here. In the past year, I went from heartbreak to anger to acceptance and ultimately to awareness. And if you're a subscriber on the website, you will see this transformation over the writing. And when I say that, let's pull this apart a little bit so you could see my processing in public. In the beginning, what I was writing about was awareness of my external surroundings. I was watching other people's behavior and starting to notice things that bothered me, but bothered me because they were behaviors that I had acted on in the past or present, or I could end up doing it later that day. And that's where it started. And then once I came to acceptance and started to see what happened with Tabitha more clearly, I then finally realized, Arthur, you're fucked up, dude. You got some work to do. And once I made that admission to myself, because if I want to be completely honest, I was naive in the end and just thought, okay, it's a fight. You know, we didn't see things the same way, but we'll repair it and we'll move on and we'll be stronger because of it. But the one thing about Tabitha, and one of the things about why I feel like how I do for her, is because that woman has standards and she is not willing to betray those in the slightest. And I love that. It reminds me, I think for men, the closest equivalent we have to that is a man who stands for nothing falls for everything. And to me, that's a feminine version of it. Well, in the end, she held to her standards and didn't give us another shot past that. And once I finally accepted that I had done structural damage to the relationship, that's when I could finally start to move forward. So you see that in the writing where I start really calling myself out on these behaviors, but the thing that kept coming up was, okay, I've done these things, or I tend to act in these certain ways. Why? Why do I act this way, and where does it come from? And that's where we're at now. is the most important relationship you can have in your life is a healthy, good relationship with yourself. And that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm actively working on. And it's interesting because a lot of listeners of this show are starting to send DMs and so forth. And they're rooting for me to finally reach out and go to her. But I've tried to explain this as best I could, but I still have some work left. When I show up to her in the fall, I want to be fully integrated because she deserves that. And more importantly, I deserve that. And that's why I haven't rushed back. And let me tell you something about how good that feels. Because me, even a little over a year ago, I would have rushed. I wouldn't have done the work, changed, and then have gone back. You know what I would have done? I've changed. I'm sorry. Give me another chance. And I would honestly think that I deserved it. I didn't. But I'm getting close to the point where I know that I do, because I have done tremendous amounts of work, and I am so proud of myself. And let me give you, because this feeling just came up as we're recording this, but the thing that I've also noticed about when you do this kind of work, you can actually say you're proud of yourself, and it doesn't feel weird. It doesn't feel icky. It doesn't feel like you're lying to yourself. It feels deserved because it's earned. And that makes all of the difference. And that might seem small, but to me, it's huge, because I have never been able to say that I'm proud of myself to myself in my entire life and feel like I deserved it, which is an amazing feeling alone. And to take this one step further, I have had real issues accepting compliments from others. I would always question if I deserved it, which is a whole nother issue, but I'm sure we're going to get into that as we progress through the architecture of self. But people, like primarily subscribers and fans of Cuffed, you've sent me messages and emails and so forth saying how, wow, I've been a subscriber for 6 months or 9 months, and I'm impressed with what you have done in that time. And yes, I will admit, I do love the and how do I put this? But I do love, I find it flattering when you say, if Dab doesn't take you back, I will. I know you're partially joking, but don't get me wrong. I am a man. I find it flattering. So that's the architecture of self and how we got here. Let's talk about the first component of the architecture itself, which is awareness, or more specifically, self-awareness. Self-awareness is huge, absolutely huge, because everything in life starts with self-awareness. You can't change what you don't see. You can't see it if you're not aware. But true awareness involves intellectual honesty, because that's the only antidote to ego, is where you start to say to yourself, the truth is more important than my ego, my image. That's where real work starts. And that's why awareness is the first component in the architecture of self series, is because all of the components behind it hinge on self-awareness. Let's talk about a little bit about self-awareness and developing it, because it's not easy at first. Lies hurt, clarity does not. Clarity can hurt in the moment, but long term, it provides the fuel that we need for change. And in the first part of the podcast, I discussed about becoming aware of external behaviors and how those bothered me. But instead of judging, calling those people are doing that, I turned it inward. And that's the important part. Now you've moved it from being people watching and judging to internalizing and using that for growth. That moves things from your blind into your view. And that's where all the foundation of everything starts. There's no other way around it. Now, as I said, self-awareness for me has been extremely difficult at times. I'm going to be completely honest. There are some things that I do sometimes that just make me shake my head. I don't fully understand why I do it, but I'm not comfortable and I'm not willing to settle with the idea that because I don't understand where this behavior comes from, that's enough. That's just labeling something. That's being intellectually honest, I guess. I can say that I do something and not defend it, but I don't understand it and I believe it there. I don't do halfway. I need to pull on that thread and follow it all the way down. And if you've listened to some of the previous podcasts, the part of my life that really started to crack open because of this work was my childhood. And I want to say, I don't think on any level I had a bad childhood. I had a great childhood. I grew up in the 80s and 90s in America, which was an amazing time. Everything about it was optimistic. Technology was improving life. It wasn't like AI is now, where people are terrified of it. Technology was going to solve everything. And to a large degree, it has solved a lot of issues that we now take for granted. But when I think of how I parent compared to how my parents parented, night and day. Absolutely night and day. And what's interesting is that I always knew the kind of father I wanted to be, and I became that father. I'm ultra present. I'm highly engaged. I am willing to sacrifice doing things with friends or for myself, for my kids, because, and this just goes to show you how I am. I one time heard a statistic that it's something like 80% of the time you'll spend with your children is before the age of 16 or something around there. And so I said to myself, I'm a big believer in the 80-20 rule, so I'm going to attack the 80% because that's what moves the needle. So I've been the dad who drives to and from dance, and all just very, very present, very active. But that has also made me realize what are things that I longed for in my childhood. Because the reason I parent the way I do is because I want my children to grow up in an environment where honesty is paramount. Being a good person is a non-negotiable. Being open and honest with your parent, because you know they're not going to judge, they're not going to discipline you. Sure, as I tell them, I could be disappointed, but I'm always going to help you first. I never had any of that. When something would go sideways, you knew the discipline was coming. So you didn't want to be honest because you already get punished again. You already felt bad. Now you'd get punished at school and then you'd get punished at home. It's like triple jeopardy. And I don't want that for my kids. And my kids don't have that. Am I perfect? Far from it. As I remind my kids daily, I'm a very flawed man, but I'm significantly better than what I was. And again, back just kind of closing up the parenting and where we're headed with the awareness is a lot of these behaviors that I'm experiencing trace back to my childhood. Like I just pointed to, the honesty issue. Well, then when everything I did I felt was wrong, I never felt like I was good enough. No matter what I did, I never felt like my parents were proud of me. They never told me they were, if they were. And so with my kids, I tell them all the time that I'm proud of them for their grades or decisions they make or the way they handle themselves. Never had any of that. So that's where we're going over the next 12 musings or 11 musings and the podcast going forward. Thanks for being here. Hold the standard. Stay close.